back to you.
There we go.
Okay.
All right. Right. So welcome everyone. I'm Keith Bergman, Littleton Town Administrator, and I want to thank folks for coming here tonight to an informational forum on the Stretch Energy Code. And the reason we're having this forum is that the town of Littleton is pursuing certification under the state's Green Communities program. And we have been successful in obtaining some technical assistance funds from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, to help us with that effort. It was our own very active sustainability committee chaired by Aaron Healy, and we have many members of the committee here with us tonight, which were the impetus behind our requesting the technical assistance funds in order to pursue the Green Community certification. If the town is certified under that program, that we would obtain $140,000 in Green Communities funding from the state's Department of Energy Resources. And we'd obtain that at the time of certification, and we would be eligible for competitive funding rounds in the future. So it will be a way for us to seriously approach energy conservation and green initiatives in Littleton, and we're very excited about that. We're going to introduce in just a moment our Stretch Energy Code presenter, Mike Barry, who does this all around the Commonwealth. And we appreciate his coming to Littleton tonight. We're going to have adoption of the Stretch Energy Code as an article on the warrant for the May 4, 2015 rather town meeting. So we're looking forward to that. The Stretch Energy Code is one of 5 criteria that are required in order for a community to be certified as a green community under the state's program. The other sorts of things that we would need to do is to have as-of-right siting in our zoning bylaw for certain energy-related facilities, and an expedited permitting process in our zoning bylaw. We've already had those, our existing bylaw, analyzed, and the Department of Energy Resources has ruled that our current zoning meets the requirements of the Green Communities program, so we don't need to bring any further zoning amendments forward to town meeting in order to qualify. The adoption of the Stretch Code, which requires adoption of a local town bylaw, is something that a town meeting would need to do, and where Littleton has not adopted the Stretch Energy Code in the past, we would need to bring that to town meeting. The other 2 criteria that are part of the Green Communities program is to have a policy on fuel-efficient vehicles and to have a plan for reducing energy by 10% over, or 20%, trying to get on cheap, over 5 years. Or is it 10% over 2.5 years? We'll talk. But we're very excited to have the technical assistance in this project from MAPC. We have Axel Tefera, who's here with us tonight. And we also want to thank, and I'm very appreciative to the efforts of Kelly Brown, our regional coordinator for Green Communities from the Department of Energy Resources. Interestingly, one of the things we had to do in order to pre-qualify Littleton for the Green Communities program was, and one of the reasons why we have not adopted Green Communities since the inception of that act back in 2008, is that for the 40 or so communities that have municipal light plants that are municipal electric departments, the Board of Electric Light Commissioners would need to adopt a surcharge on all of their customers and to pay into a fund that is then used to give grants to green communities. All of the investor-owned utilities in the Commonwealth pay into that fund currently, and the law provides that your municipal light department has to adopt that surcharge as well in order to pre-qualify you for the Green Communities program. Unless your community is served by both the municipal electric department and the investor-owned utility. So as it happens, with Kelly's assistance, actually I think with the town of Boxborough's assistance, and certainly the assistance of our Littleton Electric Light Department, we found not one, not two, but 3 customers in the town of Littleton who are served by a private investor-owned utility. So that's enough to qualify us to apply for Green Communities without having to adopt the surcharge. So lucky us. And if anyone's watching and knows anyone in Boxborough that is served by an investor-owned utility, please call my counterpart at the Boxborough Town Hall, because they're looking for at least one so that they can qualify. And they haven't found it yet, but they're looking. So I want to next move on to welcome our main presenter tonight, Mike Berry, who does this for the Department of Energy Resources. I also want to thank our building commissioner, Roland Bernier, for being here with us tonight. And Mike, I'm happy to have you.
Thank you.
Here in Littleton.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Don't clap yet. Don't clap yet. You're going to get to hear about codes for the next 30 minutes. So, yeah, and thanks. I was just in Pepperell last night. I think I'm just now going over the 100 mark of these that I've done across the Commonwealth. I've serviced towns from the Cape to Western Massachusetts, from the northern side of the state to the southern side. So I'm familiar with a lot of the things that go on around the stretch code, the misconceptions that are out there. So hopefully tonight, through this presentation, I'll be able to give you an overview of what makes the stretch code a little bit different from the base energy code that's currently part of your building code here in town, but also be able to point out why I think it's a beneficial code, but also help kind of debunk some misconceptions that are out there around the code. So I'm going to cover the what and why, what is the stretch energy code and why do we have one. I'll also talk about compliance and cost. How do you comply to the stretch code and what are some of the costs associated to meeting the code, and then the future of the stretch code and codes in general around Massachusetts, especially energy codes. The stretch energy code and what we're going to talk about tonight only affects energy. So typically when I do these talks, people want to ask about everything else. Well, what about handicapped accessibility? What about structural issues with homes? What we're primarily discussing tonight and what we're going to focus in on is just the energy code. So only things that are triggered when you are doing something with the energy code. So here in Massachusetts, we have what they call the International Energy Conservation Code for 2012. That's the current energy code in your town today. And that's actually the book right there. The stretch code is an appendix to the Massachusetts Building Code, Appendix 115AA, and it's part of our building code. But towns, as mentioned earlier, towns have to adopt the appendix as their sole energy code. So a lot of people will ask, they'll say, well, what if we only want to adopt a little bit of the stretch energy code? You can't do that. You either vote in all of it or none of it. So, and the reason why they do that is because you're going to see that even though, again, there's some differences, for the most part, it's pretty similar to the code that we're currently under right now in Littleton. The stretch energy code, what makes it just stretch is it's 15 to 20% more energy efficient. In 2010, when the stretch code first came out, we were under the International Energy Conservation Code for 2006. The stretch code, when it was written, it was to mirror or be similar to the current code we're under. So at one point, we were almost 30% more energy efficient with the stretch code. But now that the codes have changed, we're getting closer and closer to our current code. On the commercial side, you need to be 20% more efficient. And I'm going to talk a little bit about commercial code as well, but I'm not going to kind of dwell in commercial code because we don't see many builders struggle with that. So I started off by kind of speaking to some of the misconceptions around the stretch code. And early on in 2010, a lot of people said, well, you know, it sounds kind of experimental. Does our town want to take this on and be kind of put ourselves out there and see if we fail with it? But what a lot of people know is the stretch code is built in, and its roots are in our current and past energy codes. Things like the home energy rating standard, which you're going to hear me talk about, has been part of our code. But builders have an option. They can build one way or another, and I'll talk about those options. But what people are afraid of is if you start removing options, is that going to be tough for builders to meet this code? Also, when we were doing these, people said, well, you know, back in the 80s, we were making houses too tight and people are getting sick. This is going to cause unhealthy homes. What you're going to see is we're on top of ventilation and how ventilation's addressed. That the only way you can meet this code is by putting in foam insulation. In fact, it's the opposite. Because of the trade-offs associated with performance path construction, which I'll talk about how that works with the stretch code, you're going to see that you have trade-offs. You can use foam, you can use fiberglass, you can use cellulose, you can use a mixture of any of those. And also that oil-heated homes can't meet the stretch code. And again, when we talk about trade-offs, the stretch code looks at newly constructed homes through the performance path as a whole house as a system, not just each individual component. And lastly, the biggest misconception we hear when we were doing these early on is we've heard that if we adopt the stretch code, all the homes in our town have to be brought up to meet the stretch code. And you're going to see the only time you have to address the stretch code, the stretch energy code is just as you would in the town currently. If you do anything that affects the energy code, that's when you have to address the stretch code. We've already covered that. Stretch code is one of the 5 criteria. So why do towns adopt the stretch code? Primarily for grants right now. However, early on, folks came to the Board of Building Regulations and Standards in Boston and actually asked to put forth more stringent energy codes. I think towns like Northampton, a town on Martha's Vineyard, actually came forth. BVRS looked at this, the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, and thought we should have an alternative code that towns can adopt, but at least it's a uniform alternative code. One of the things that people were also concerned about is adoption of the stretch code makes our state building code not uniform. But now you're going to see how many towns have adopted it, and builders are nomadic. Builders just don't build in one town, they build in multiple towns. So again, early on, some of the misconceptions may have kind of held true because it was experimental for some builders. It's the first time they ever tried performance path construction. But now more and more builders are getting used to it because of not only the stretch code, but the changes to our current energy code. Other reasons why people wanted to adopt the stretch code or become a green community is to reduce the dependence on foreign oil, to address climate change issues, and also address pollution. I actually just covered this, so BVRS was looking at ways to adopt a code that towns could have a more energy efficient code, but would be a consistent one across the street. This is the current map, and thank you for updating this. Thank you for updating it. As of March 24th, 147 communities in Massachusetts have adopted the stretch code. In 2010, when I first started doing these, we had this map, and it was Cambridge and Newton were early adopters. When I started to do these, and I do presentations in Arlington, I did 5 presentations in Arlington before the stretch code passed. The first one I did to a room full of very angry and irate builders because it was experimental, it was new. And then my second one, I had a 50% full room. The third one, 25%. The very last stretch code informational session I did in Arlington, we had 2 builders show up because Lexington had adopted it, Cambridge had it, so many of the surrounding communities had it. So we see more and more of that where builders are getting exposed to performance path construction through the stretch code and through the current base code. So we're seeing towns not having as much issues in the past. The biggest misconceptions we're still hearing out there is bringing the whole house up to meet the standard, or I've heard when I remodel my house, I have to bring my whole house up. So when we talk about renovations and additions and new construction under the residential portion of the stretch code, you're going to see it's very similar. And some of those challenges now with the new adoption of our base energy code have kind of taken those misconceptions away.
Oh, Mike,
Yeah.
I just wanted to introduce that Rich Crowley, who is a member of our planning board in Littleton and also a member of the BVRS.
And this is like having to present in front of a college professor for
That's
me.
right.
So
I just wanted to alert you.
That's I told.
I think he
Yeah.
switched off his teaching tonight to be here.
I did.
So appreciate
I
it.
told my colleagues tonight that I'm like, I have to present tonight in front of someone from BBRS. Raises the bar for me, so.
That's all right, I just got off the phone with Ian, the director.
Yeah, I think I have them on speed dial as well. So what does the Stretch Energy Code apply to? It applies to the same things that the Massachusetts Base Energy Code does. So everything currently, again, in your town, if you were to pull a permit and you had to address something in the Energy Code, whether that's insulation, doors and windows, mechanical ventilation, heating equipment, cooling equipment, lighting, duct tightness, and renewable energy. So it basically mirrors the Base Energy Code. And again, I say basically, and I'll talk about what those little nuances and differences are. What does it affect? Residential additions, renovations, and new construction. What you're going to see on the residential side of this is the new construction portion is the biggest difference under the Stretch Energy Code to the base code. Under commercial, new construction and additions and renovations are exempt. So just like under the base code, only the new areas and the affected areas have to meet the code. For residential, under the commercial, new additions and new construction, but renovations are exempt. And I'll get into that when I talk about commercial code. I came up with this chart just to compare and contrast the current code that you have in your town compared to the code, the Stretch Code. So what you see is on IECC 2012, which is the International Energy Conservation Code, and I apologize for having to keep on repeating that, but I always feel like we have so many acronyms in the code that if we don't explain them, and I say any of them, please stop me if you want me to tell you what it is. IECC 2012, which is our current code, and the Stretch Code. So currently, again, I mentioned the biggest change between the Stretch Code and the base code is under residential new construction, the only way you can build a home is through what they call the performance path. Unlike the base code where you have a prescriptive path, which means follow the code to a T and you pass, and then you have a performance path. We've had performance path construction in the code, I think, since the 6th edition. We've referenced the HERS index since then. Again, this should help kind of debunk the experimental portion of this. The big difference in this town, if you were to build a new home, you only can follow the performance path, which means your home has to be energy modeled, which means you're working with a home energy radar, HERS radar, which I'll talk about in a little a further slide. Your home has to be tested with a blower door. Back when we started doing these in 2010, and we're under IECC 2006, that's the first time under the base energy code we had to have some type of performance testing, and that was for your ducts. So we went from a code that said we're not doing any performance testing unless you choose that path, to a code that says if you put a ducted system in, so a heating system or cooling system, and you're running your ducts outside a conditioned space, meaning above your insulation in your attic, below your insulation in your basement, you have to have them tested. You're going to have them pressure tested, and then from there we're going to look at how they leak. And I apologize, that was IECC 2009. Then under IECC 2012, we say not only now do you have to test your ducts, but now you have to test the shell of your house. You have to have a blower door test done. The fact that you had to address more envelope tightness. So through the natural act of sealing up wire chases and plumbing chases, which was part of the code under fire safety, we actually now are starting to focus on key bypasses, where you get a lot of leakage through top plates and structural framing in homes. Windows. This is one of the big changes you'll see in the differences between the Stretch Energy Code for renovations and additions compared to the Base Energy Code. The Base Energy Code requires a 0.32 U-value window or better. What does that mean? It means a window that's not Energy Star. The Stretch Code requires you to put a 0.30 window or better, which is the threshold for Energy Star. So I don't know in our town, and I don't want to put our building code official in the room on the spot, but do you see a lot of non-Energy Star windows installed in town?
I see most of them installed.
Most are.
Most people are using the Stretch Code rather than using the 2012.
Right. So when you look at the difference between the prescriptive and the prescriptive side of the code and the performance side, and especially under renovations and additions, you're going to see that the big difference is windows.
I think even if you go down to Home Depot, most of the everything but the absolute cheapest windows are Energy Star.
Right. So that's why when we talk about the difference with renovations and additions, you're going to see it's not too different. The big difference is, again, removing that performance path under new construction. You're going to look at tighter ducts. Now, the difference with a performance path compared to the prescriptive path is going to give you hard numbers you have to hit. So under the prescriptive path, it says the mandatory test is 3 CFM at ACH 50. What does that mean? That's the tightness. That's the minimum tightness you have to hit in your ducts. Under the performance side, the levels can vary because, again, you're looking at a house as a system. So if the ducts leak a little bit, you have to factor that leakage in, but let's say you really beef up the shell of your house, and the shell of your house doesn't leak as much. You have these trade-offs, so if you want to put in a window that's not as higher performing, but you put in more insulation, you put in better heating equipment, better cooling equipment, all that factors into how the house performs when you model a house. The prescriptive code is going to tell you exactly what you need to install, and that's what is going to be tested. The type of mechanical equipment you put in, again, your heating, cooling equipment, you must meet the standard. So one of the big things that came up when Kelly and I did Pepperell, and we talked last night in Pepperell, is that people were concerned. They said, well, I've heard if I have to remove my hot water tank or put a new hot water tank in, I have to go with the highest efficiency hot water tank that is out on the market. And that's actually not true. If you replace a hot water tank on a renovations and additions, you have to bring it up to, you have to buy one that's the minimum federal standard. It doesn't require you to have the highest efficiency. And again, under new construction, you would factor that efficiency into the performance of your home. So it does help you having a higher efficiency piece of equipment. It doesn't require you to have it. Efficient lighting. Under the base code right now, if you were to build a home, put an addition on your home, 75% of your lighting has to be high efficacy. Again, under performance path construction, that's factored in under the software program REMRate that actually does this. And mechanical ventilation under both codes has to be addressed and would want it to be addressed. As you're tightening up a house, you want to look at how tight you're getting it and when you have to bring in mechanical ventilation.
Does high efficiency lighting mean you can't use Edison base sockets because you can theoretically put an incandescent in?
Yeah.
Or is it you can use an Edison base, but you got to put a high efficient, a CFL or an LED?
Most of the LED fixtures now are pin-based, so you can't get an Edison-based. However, I've seen Edison-based installed with a high-efficacy bulb that's an Edison-based bulb, basically one that looks like a regular bulb for folks that don't know the terminology. So I think the code, if I'm not mistaken, is a hardwired fixture that can accommodate a high-efficacy bulb. I don't know if it gets into Edison-based versus pin-based.
Oh, so as long as it can accommodate a high efficiency bulb.
I believe that's the way it's written in the base code. So, it does allow itself that someone could unscrew them, but what we're seeing out there, the best pin-based, the best LED fixtures you're getting are pin-based. So under additions and renovations, you have the two paths. So under the stretch.
Did you mechanical ventilation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Under the additions and renovations, you have two options just as you would currently in town. You can build a home by the prescriptive path, again, follow the code to what it says, with adding in these three things. The stretch code requires you to put in, again, a window, door, or skylight that's Energy Star rated. You have to put in tighter ducts, but you'd have to do that anyhow on a project under the base code or the stretch code. And then you would do what they call the thermal bypass checklist. And what the thermal bypass checklist is, everything that's in the code that addresses how leakage occurs in a house, how you align insulation. You want to make sure your insulation is making contact, you're not wrapping around outlet boxes. It's all in the thermal bypass checklist. It takes everything that's in the code and just puts it on a single piece of paper, and the builder checks it off. So the builder would check off anything applicable to their project, their renovation or addition project, and then hand it to the code official upon completion. And obviously you're going to see the code official retains all the same authority that they had, so they're still going to go out and do their inspections. You can do the performance path under renovations and additions for the stretch code. But if you look at this example we use, let's say this house was built in 1970 or 1960, and you put an addition on your house. Under the current code and stretch code, only that added portion, the additional room added on, would have to meet the code, not the rest of the house. So under performance path, you'd end up having to test it, the whole house. And if this is a 1960s house and you had no upgrades to it, it's not going to pass. So under the stretch code, one of the things that we advise towns that have a majority of their work going on in their town's additions and renovations, this code makes sense. So like last night when we were in Pepperell had 4 new homes built last year in Pepperell. All the rest of the work's additions and renovations. So when you show this to builders and they say, oh, okay, that's it, you wouldn't want to do the performance path under this scenario. But let's say that,
4 new ones built last week, right?
yeah. So under new homes, this is where the big change is, and this is when I start getting into the home energy standard, the HERS index. Under new homes, you remove the prescriptive path, which you currently have in town, and all you have is the performance path. And the performance path says that a home being built, a newly constructed home, has to meet a HERS 70 if it's 3,000 square feet or less, or HERS 65 or if it's 3,000 square feet or more. The difference is because bigger homes save more energy. So when we looked at this, it's unfair for a home that's 3,000 square feet or less to be compared to a home that's bigger, because bigger homes can save more energy by making less changes and less alterations to the way they're constructed. What you see on the right-hand side of this slide is the HERS index. So this was actually put together by the Home Energy Rating Standard, which was actually used for energy efficiency mortgages. But what it was used to do is to rate existing homes. So the idea is you go into a software program like this program called REMRate, you put in all the characteristics of your home, hit enter, and it'd say, this home as it stands right now is a HERS index of 150, which means the average home built in the 1970s, 1980s could be 100 to 150 range, which is back then when it was built to the code, but the code back then wasn't as energy efficient as the code now. But let's say you wanted to go in and add in new insulation, as we were talking about, better windows, tighten up the shell, put in better heating equipment, and you were taking out a loan for that. What the home energy rating system would do is then show you what the reduction would be. And what it would tell the banks is if this was cost effective for them to lend you money. Would the payback in energy savings be cost effective to the loan that they would give you? What you see now, and we'll get into the HERS index, is so right now the HERS index for newly constructed homes being 65 and 70 respectively is pretty close to the current code now, IECC 2012. Your targets fluctuate based on the size of your homes too under the current base code. So this is the targets that new homes would have to hit. And then the other portions that newly constructed homes would have to address is they would work with a HERS rating company. So a HERS rating company is someone that would come out, review your plans, look at how you're building your home, make recommendations to get you to a 70 or 65. And then they would come out and they would inspect your home. They would do the thermal bypass checklist for you, which they're going to go out and make sure that the insulation's installed. They grade it on a 1 to 3 standard, 1 being excellent, 3 being passable. Those all factor into your score. So just having your contractor do the right thing, having them go from an installation of a grade 3 to a grade 1, can significantly move that needle. So you're not asking a lot of your contractors, but you have a third set of eyes that is out there doing these inspections. They also do your blower door and duct testing. And as I said earlier, under the current code, you have to have that done anyhow. So when we used to do this before and would say, well, yeah, you have to do the duct testing, but the blower door is now something additional, you have to have the blower door testing done as well. So this is where the code's starting to become very similar between the stretch code and the base energy code. So the home energy rating standard, the index, this goes back to that misconception of it being, the code being experimental. The HERS index has not only been used for code compliance here in Massachusetts, it's been used by the Internal Revenue Service for tax credits. It's been used by the EPA for their Energy Star Homes program. It's currently used here in Massachusetts for the Massachusetts Residential New Construction Program, which addresses and provides incentives to folks building an owner-investor utilities, and I know you are municipal, but I believe there's some natural gas here from National Grid. So if a builder was building a home with natural gas on site, they'd be eligible for incentives through Mass Save. ResNet is the board, Residential Energy Services Network. So people always ask me, they're like, so where do these HERS raters come from? Who governs them? Well, HERS raters are governed by a national board. They have to go through trainings. They have to do continuing education credits. They have to have errors and omissions insurance. They have to have third-party quality insurance. So every HERS rater, if you're familiar with the relationship of a real estate agent and a broker, that's the same relationship between a HERS rater and a provider. So every HERS rater has to have a provider, and the provider actually reviews their work, all their work, and actually has to come out in the field and do a certain number of QAs as well. So ResNet also provides a code of ethics and a complaint resolution standard that builders can go to. So one of the things we hear from builders, we heard early on was, well, how do I know a HERS rater is going to show up to the job? How do I know I'm going to pass? HERS raters would be treated just like any other sub, whether it's your electrical sub or your plumbing sub. You would hire a HERS rater. The builder hires a HERS rater on their own. They contract for services. And like any good builder, you're not going to pay them unless you pass the code. They don't show up the day to do your installation inspection, just as you would any other subcontractor. You hold them to the same standard. They're your subcontractor. They're your trade person. And if that fails, you have a complaint resolution standard through ResNet. I just touch upon this and I won't dwell on it, but I spoke about how there's incentives available for new construction here in Massachusetts. So even if folks are building in other communities who are watching this tonight or in the room, if you're building in communities where there are an owner-investor utility, or you're building a home here in town that has natural gas service, you're eligible, the builder or homeowner, whoever applies, is eligible for this money of up to $7,000 for a single-family home, $4,000 for a multifamily home, subsidies up to $900 to cover a HERS rater, money to provide an additional rebates for things like heating equipment, appliances, lighting. I actually have to update this right now. We're not only giving out free CFLs through this program, but also LEDs, as many as you want for free. So regardless if Littleton adopts a code, or there's builders who are watching this or in the room today who want to tap into this program, you need to put in high efficiency lighting anyhow. You need to buy the bulbs. This program will give it to you for free. So definitely take advantage of this program. So this gives a sense of the cost to the stretch code. So this uses, I'll just go across the top, a single family home, average single family home of 2,672 square feet. This home is a 3-bedroom, 1.5 cape, gas heated. And what we looked at when we looked at the upgrade, how do you go from the base energy code to the stretch code? This actually was done under IECC 2009, so under the last code that we just had. So this isn't actually been updated yet. So actually that dollar amount has now decreased, because as you see, the things like blower door testing is now a requirement. The insulation levels have gone up since the last code adoption. But even if we use this as a scenario to look at whether or not it's cost effective, the upgrade cost on this, just so you know, is going to from a standard hot water tank to something that's a little bit more energy efficient, maybe an indirect hot water tank or an instantaneous hot water tank. And then the biggest thing here is air sealing, reducing your blower door number, so tightening up the shell. And then lastly, one of the biggest bangs of the buck is that insulation grading. We went from a grade 3 insulation to a grade 1, which there should be no cost for that, because you're just, again, asking your contractor to install the products that you're paying for properly. But we did put in a little money for that, because you might actually want to go with a contractor who maybe has a better Yelp review, or someone has worked with in the past and feels like they can actually do this. So maybe there's an associated cost with that. The additional cost to a 30-year fixed mortgage is $214 annually, and this was also done under energy costs. I think it was 2-3 years ago, like 2 to 3 years ago. And even then, you were net positive in year 1, Could you imagine what you are right now with the energy costs the way they are?
Those costs are if you have a house, you call a contractor in and want to improve your energy efficiency or your HERS rating.
This is going from a code built home to a stretch code built home.
A new home?
Yes, new home. Yes, yes. Thank you. And actually, I think if you look down where it says single family, the 1,708 square foot home, and the upgrade costs that are really high, the 4,162, that's actually for a triple decker, and that is a renovation project. So, again, you see on the other side, your net positive. Now, these numbers have always, we've had issues in the past where people say those numbers look really low. Well, they're statewide averages. Obviously, in some areas, the prices may be a little bit higher. They could be lower. You're also going to shop around for the best deal. So we use statewide averages when we've done this. And we've gone through, and I know my team, we've looked at these numbers again, and we've actually updated them. And you're even more net positive now in year one. You're actually getting more money back, a return on investment. So the commercial stretch code. So the commercial stretch code appendix addresses new buildings and additions of 5,000 square feet or more. You have two options depending on size. You have your performance option, which says you have to be 20% better than the ASHRAE code, which is the commercial building code, or a prescriptive option, and this is for most building types of 5,000 to 100,000 square feet. The performance option says that you need to be 20% better than ASHRAE. I think that this actually needs to be updated, but the ASHRAE building code, the commercial building code, and this is for all buildings over 100,000 square feet. Now, I don't know what the average size commercial building is in your town. I know the project that was added in Littleton, the new grocery store, but that also falls under a different code. What's the biggest commercial project you got going right now? Do you know off the top of your head for square footage?
We just issued 450,000 square feet for the Potpourri Group.
Potpourri, right?
So that would fall under the performance path. And what we find, and you're going to see the one example that we use on performance path construction is a developer will go to their energy engineer and say, I need to be 20% better than the commercial code, get me there. And again, where we saw the biggest struggle and where we saw some of those misconceptions early on with the code was under the residential new construction portion. I used to do these trainings to a room full of builders, and I'd ask builders, raise your hand if you've ever done a performance path construction, use the performance path to build a new home. I'd have one or two builders maybe raise their hand in a room of 50. Now you do it, and it's probably 80-20. And I think that number, as the codes continuously change, that number is going to get less and less. What was early on was a concern with builders on the performance side for new construction was the fact that they'd never done it before. But when you deal with commercial builders, they've done this before. And it's not that much of a reach for them. So when we typically do this, we don't get people in. I think I had one town where someone was developing a large commercial project, came in to the presentation, looked at it, listened to what I said, and said, oh, that's it? Oh, yeah, I get that. So you have a prescriptive option for most building types, 5,000 to 100,000 square feet, and then you do have some special code exemptions. We use this as an example, and this is the Fidelity Bank building in Leominster. The reason why we use this is this was actually built before the stretch code, before we've seen some changes to the commercial energy code. This was a case study someone did on this building early on. I think this building was built in 2010 or right before that. What the developer looked at is the developer wanted to figure out where the biggest bang for their buck is if they wanted to decrease energy consumption in this building. And what they looked at, the energy engineer came up with, is that under the HVAC portion, the heating and cooling equipment, there was some areas where they could upgrade those systems. And then the other big bang for their buck was lighting. You look at a building like this, that's all glass and block. There's not much thermally you can do to that building. So the thermal upgrades are very small. I think it was $1,500. The additional cost to get this building to use 31% less energy was $100,000. They received $66,000 in utility incentives, bringing their total upgrade cost to $34,000, which made this project the return on investment in just under over 1 year, and if they didn't get the incentives, it had just been under 4 years. So again, whether it's a developer or a bank, this makes good business sense. So this is also why we don't see many issues with the commercial code, because there's an immense amount of, again, utility funding out there. Again, if the building heats with gas, you would be able to tap into some of those. But in other areas, a lot of utilities do what they call they tailor incentives, where the ones I showed you are kind of set. Was, you know, you get this back if you do that. The utilities do custom incentives for commercial buildings, and the reason why they do that, if you drive down 128 on a Saturday night when all those buildings are empty and unoccupied, they're lit up like a Christmas tree. So if they're going to keep the lights on, let's make them energy efficient. So the utility companies give out a lot of money to subsidize for lighting and heating equipment, because as you can see, those are the two biggest areas. So in the code compliance and inspections, it's the same as the base code. The code official retains the same authority, and the code official approves all documentation. So what would be new for the code official is you would be receiving for newly constructed homes, you'd be getting HERS rating reports in lieu of a res check report. And for renovations and additions, you'd be getting the thermal bypass checklist. The future of the stretch code is, I guess, what was the term we were using? Standby. We were on track to have a new stretch code coming out, and it sounds like we may be on track again, but right now Governor Baker is reviewing the codes, and his team and his administration is looking into them. But we did adopt a new code on July 1st of last year. That's the code you currently have in your town. And as I mentioned through my presentation, that the codes are very similar now. And the whole idea of the stretch code is it should be a stretch. So at some point we will see a more, or probably a more energy efficient code. I can't tell you beyond that. And I won't put anyone here in the room on the spot.
But stay tuned.
Yeah, but stay tuned. But they did, which we were very fortunate, because when we adopted the code in 2010, this is the one spot that may have been a little experimental, is we'd never adopted a code like this. But now we're lucky because we've had the code. We have 147 communities that have had it. We have, I think, over 50% of the residents live in stretch code communities here in the Commonwealth, and we have a lot of builders building to it. So we're able to solicit a ton of public comment and feedback, so we could tailor the next version of the stretch code to be one that I think will be a little bit easier for builders to understand, but also we now have some best practices that we can go back and look at. Towns that adopt the stretch code automatically adopt the new code. So once you've adopted the stretch code, you actually adopt the next version as it comes out, but that's the same thing with the base energy code. They're still taking public comments. You can send your public comments or any supporting information to the Green Communities Program at this email address. They've been posting feedback on the website since November, so you can actually go and read some comments. I also tell towns that are thinking about adopting a stretch code, look to your neighboring communities. Talk to your neighboring building code officials if you haven't already. Talk to builders in town, ask them if they've built to the stretch code, get their feedback as well, because I think you'd be surprised. And if I haven't bored you enough with code information, and this is good for the builders in the room or the builders who may be watching this, this is where you can get more information on the stretch energy code, the base energy code, and the Green Communities Program. And we're going to make this available.
This will be online.
Yep.
On demand, and probably replayed
Oh,
in a continuous loop.
the poor town of Littleton who get to listen to this over and over again. Any questions? No, it's a lot to go through.
And yet you can still build an energy inefficient fireplace the way they've been building them for the last 100 years.
Yeah, with chimneys in houses, right?
No, I'm saying the traditional
Oh,
fireplace
yeah.
is plunked on the side of the house.
Yeah, well, they call it the stack effect in houses. That's the reason why they call it the stack effect.
I know
Yeah. So, any questions specific to the stretch code, base code?
Looks like you've answered the concerns of the group, and want to thank Mike Berry very much for coming here tonight. And there will be a test. It'll be probably around, I don't know, I don't want to say what time. If it could be between 9:30 and 10 o'clock on Monday, May 4th, that would be great, because this will be one of the final articles in the warrant, so all that will be between us and adjournment is this article. But we do hope to see a lot of our voters at annual town meeting on Monday, May 4th. Lots of interesting topics on the warrant, including this one. And there are plenty of resources about the Green Communities Act and the Stretch Energy Code, which are available at the Town of Littleton's website. So we encourage you to check us out there. And I want to thank Mike Berry and Kelly Brown from DOER and Axum Tefero from APC, and all of you for being here tonight. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Keith. That was so exciting.
Hey.
Yeah, I can tell.